Hello, welcome back. It's been a while. I started chemotherapy, so Sin and Space updates are going to be a little less regular than I'd like. But for now, I'm back. I'm doing well, and let's get on with it. Sin and Space, Chapter 10. They were approaching the rocket field and what was, for Mars, an immense crowd, some 500 people behind a broad white deadline marked on the tamped dirt of the field. It was an odd-looking crowd, because it was not jammed into the smallest possible space, body-to-body, Earth fashion. The people stood separately, like forest trees, with a good square meter around each of them. It was a Mars crowd made up of people with lots of room. Tony stopped well away from the fringe of the group. This looks like a good spot, he decided. Put the box down there. We can start setting things up. Dr. Hellman, hello! A tall man, fully dressed in Earthside business clothes, strolled over. Tony had seen him only once before, when he'd appeared at the lab with Bell to make his monstrous accusation of theft, but Hugo Brenner was not an easy man to forget. Hello, Tony said shortly, and turned back to his box. Thought you might be here today? Brenner ignored the doctor's movement away from him, and went on smoothly. I want to tell you how sorry I am about what happened. Frankly, if I'd known the trail would lead to your place, I might have thought twice before I called Copper. But you understand, it's not the first time. I've let it go before. This time they took so much I couldn't very well overlook it. I understand perfectly, Tony assured him. We disapprove of theft at Sun Lake, too. Well, I'm glad to hear you don't take it personally, Doctor. As a matter of fact, I'm almost glad it happened. I've heard a lot about you and the kind of job you've been doing over there. I wish we could have met under more pleasant It's very kind of you to say so, Tony interrupted, deliberately misunderstanding. I think a man in your position would be much impressed by what we're doing at Sun Lake. Brenner smiled. I think Sun Lake is a very interesting experiment, he said in a monotone that clearly expressed his lack of interest. What I had in mind... Of course, Mr. Brenner. Whatever the drug man had to say to him personally, the doctor did not wish to hear it. We realize your only interest is in the recovery of your stolen goods. We're doing our best to find the thief. If he really is a member of our colony, that is. Please, Doctor, don't put words in my mouth. Naturally, I'm interested in recovering my goods, but I'm not worried about it. I'm quite sure your people will turn up the guilty party. Again, his voice carried a flat lack of conviction. Commissioner Bell has seen to it that we will turn up a guilty party, Tony retorted. I think the commissioner was unnecessarily harsh. Hugo Brenner shrugged it off. If it had been up to me... Well, that's Bell's job. I suppose he has to handle it his own way. Let's quit beating around the bush, Doctor. I came over here to offer you a job, not to talk. No. Suppose you listen to my offer first. No! All right, then. Name your own terms. I'll meet your price. I need a doctor, a good one. I don't want to work for you at any price. Brenner's mouth turned up at the corners. Obviously, he enjoyed the game, and equally obliviously, he thought he was going to win. Let me mention a figure. He moved closer. $1 million a year. Well, thought the doctor. Now he had a clearer idea of what his own price was. Now he knew it wasn't $1 million. 10 times what he'd made in a peak Earth year. He looked full into Brenner's smirking face and knew something else. He hadn't been so clear through boiling mad in a long time, and he was fed up with diplomacy. Deliberately he raised his voice. Didn't you hear me before, Brenner? Or didn't you understand? He found it gratifying to notice people turning his way, edging in to listen. Let me make myself absolutely clear, he went on loudly. I don't want to work for you. I don't like the business you're in. I know what you need a doctor for, and so does everyone else on Mars. If your boys over at Hop Heaven can't keep their noses out of your Marcane, that's not my worry. I don't want to be the resident physician in a narcotics factory. Stay away from me. The smirk left Brenner's face. It was ugly, contorted, and much too close. Tony realized too late that Brenner's fist was even closer. Abruptly, he stopped feeling like a hero and began to feel like a fool. Then, quite suddenly, Brenner's fist was no longer approaching, and Brenner was flat on the ground. Tony tried to figure out what had happened. It didn't make sense. He became aware of a ring of grinning, congratulatory faces surrounding him, and of Tad next to him, giggling gleefully. He called to the boy curtly, turned on his heel, and walked back a few steps to his portable lab. Nobody helped Brenner to his feet. He must have got up by himself, because when Tony looked back, out of the corner of his eye, Brenner was gone. A short man bustled up. "I heard that, Dr. Hellman. I didn't see you hit him, but I heard you tell him off." He pumped Tony's hand delightedly. "Hello, Trebrier. That makes two of us," Tony thought. "I didn't see myself hit him either. Look, I know it's no use asking you not to talk about it, but go easy, will you? Don't blow it up too much when you tell it." It needs no amplification. You slap his face and challenge, he reaches for a weapon, you knock him unconscious with a single blow, you tell him, "Hugo Brenner, there's not gold enough." "Knock off, will you?" begged the doctor. "He wanted me to work over at his place by Syrtis Major, Brenner Pharmaceuticals Corporation, whatever he calls it. You know all his people get a Marcaine craving from the stuff that leaks out of his lousy machinery. He wanted me there to keep giving his boys cures. I said no, and he offered me a lot of money, and I got sore, shot off my mouth. He started to sock me, and what? Tony still hadn't figured that out. He turned back to the box, still only half set up. Shabrir said thoughtfully, "So you know that much, eh? Then you know it's nothing new, this business of missing Marcaine?" Tony abruptly turned back to him, no longer uninterested. "Brenner said something about previous thefts. What's it all about?" "Only what you said yourself." Shabrir shrugged. "What did he offer you? 300,000? 4? He paused, and when Tony made no reply, went on. "You can get better than that. It would be cheaper than junking his plant and building a new one." "I know I can get better than that," the doctor said impassively. "What do you know about missing Marcaine, Shabrir?" "Nothing all of Marsport doesn't know. Was it in the neighborhood of 500,000? That would be much less than the freight rates for new machines. He's used to freight being only a small part of his overhead. He ships a concentrated product." Shabrir chuckled happily. How it must hurt when he thinks of importing plate and tubes and even, God forbid, castings. I tell you, a man doesn't know what freight can mean until he's handled liquor. Bulk is bad. Even just running the bulk liquor into glass-lined tanks of rocket ships is bad. It means that Mars ships water to Earth. Actually, but the foolish laws say we cannot dehydrate, let the water be added on Earth, and still label it Mars liquor. "Please," said Tony wryly. "Please, Shabrir." The man shrugged. "So we take a little of the water out? 50%, say. Water's water. They pour it in on Earth. Nobody knows. Nobody cares. Bulk shipment is still bad. Very bad. But bottles! Dr. Hellman, there is no known way of dehydrating a glass bottle. We ship them in. We fill them. We ship them back. They break. People steal them here and aboard ship. And at the Earth rocket port. Also, the label can say bottled on Mars." "Muffle your sobs, Shabrir. I happen to know that people pay for Mars liquor and pay a great deal for bottled on Mars. At least you're legal, and I understand you make good stuff." "I'd drink it myself," said Shabrir righteously. "To save the freight on Earthside rye?" Tony grinned and then asked seriously, "Listen, Shabrir, if you know anything about this Marcaine business that we don't, for God's sake, spill it. I don't have to tell you how hard this thing is hitting us at Sun Lake. What does all of Marsport know?" "Was it perhaps 750? The other man asked blandly. "Fair exchange," Tony decided. 1,000,000, he said. "So? This I do not understand. Why so much for a doctor if he's to have a new plant?" Shabrir shook his head, shrugged, and went on more briskly. "I have told you already, if you understand. Brenner needs a new plant. His machines are no good. They leak. His men inhale the micron dust, they get the craving, and they start to steal the product. Soon they are no good for the work, and he sends them back to Earth. You see today how many new men he brings in. And then, one day, there's more Marcaine missing. 1 minute, Shabrir." Tony turned and signaled Tad to take a break, then moved off a few steps and motioned to the other man to follow him. "You think it's a frame-up?" he demanded in a low, intense voice. "You would have me speak against our Commissioner Bell?" Shabrir asked with only the faintest trace of sarcasm showing. "Such a thing I will not do, but I beg of you to consider, if Sun Lake Colony should be bankrupt, their laboratory must be sold at auction by the Commissioner, and such a plant would suit Mr. Brenner very well indeed. They say here in Marsport that machinery in the laboratory is adaptable to many kinds of production. They say it is good, tight, well-built equipment, and it will not leak. Till now it seemed quite clear." The little man shook his head doubtfully. "Now, I do not know. A plant? Yes. A doctor? Yes. But both? And he offered $1 million. This I do not understand, unless he plans to work both plants. There's a rumor which has some currency today. A deep bass booming of the warning horn cut him off. People began edging away from the center of the field, terminating conversations, rejoining their own groups. "You'll excuse me now? I must go," Shabrir said, when the horn died down enough to permit conversation again. "I have my place reserved, but they will not hold it." Place? Tony, still trying to catch up with the implications of the other man's news, didn't follow the quick shift. "What for?" "Oh, you're after Douglas Graham, too?" "Of course. I understand he is let us say a drinker. If I can reach him before any of these other vultures, who knows, maybe a whole chapter on Mars liquor." He seized Tony's hand in a quick grasp of friendship. "Good luck, Dr. Hellman," he said, and dashed off, running ludicrously on his short legs to rejoin his own party before the landing. Tony searched the sky. The rocket was not yet in sight. He got back to work, swiftly now, setting up his equipment. Shabrir had mentioned a rumor. Never mind, there was enough to think about. The whole thing planned beforehand to ruin Sun Lake. Maybe. Shabrir was notorious as a gossip and petty troublemaker. A frame-up. Maybe. And how could they find out? Who was responsible? Who was innocent? Neely, Naughton, Bell, and Brenner? Shabrir, with his fluid chatter and his shrewd little eyes? Neely at least was a decent, competent man. Maybe. But how could you tell? How could you single them out? Parasites, he thought bitterly, the cheerful Shabrir as much as the arrogant Brenner. Mars liquor brought fantastic prices because it was distilled from marshes of Martian plants containing carbohydrates, instead of being distilled from marshes of Earth plants containing carbohydrates. And the friendly, plump little man got plumper on the profits culled from Earth's neurotic needs. It wasn't really much of an improvement on Brenner's Marcane business. A minor difference in moral values, but all of them were parasites as long as they didn't devote their time to the terrible problem of freeing Mars from the shadow of Earth's dominance. And what about our lab? Unquestionably, it was better to concentrate radioactive methylene blue for the treatment of cancerous kidneys than it was to concentrate alkaloids for Earthside gowheads. But that, too, was only a difference in moral values. Parasites all. "The rocket!" yelled Tad.